From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded.
The most shocking moment in American history wasn't just the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It was what happened next. When Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot JFK's accused assassin, the nation was left stunned and terrified.
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. I'm the only person in the background that knows the truth.
But what happened to Ruby after that chilling moment? The story that followed is filled with mystery, fear, and shocking twists you won't believe. Let's uncover what really happened to the man who changed history forever. The shot that shook the nation. On November 22, 1963, Americans were going about their regular Friday routines when the news hit like a thunderclap. President John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. The motorcade that was supposed to be a cheerful procession turned into chaos as shots rang out near Dealey Plaza. The young and charismatic president who had brought so much hope to the nation lay gravely wounded in the back seat of his convertible limousine. By 1:00 p.m., he was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. The nation was in disbelief. People wept openly in the streets. Schools sent students home early. Families sat in stunned silence in front of their televisions, struggling to accept that their leader was gone. The loss of JFK was more than just the death of a president. For many, it felt like the death of America's innocence. Kennedy had been a symbol of youth, energy, and promise. His speeches about a new frontier had inspired millions. Now, all of that was gone in a flash. The entire country entered a period of mourning that would leave a lasting scar on its collective memory. Just 2 days later, while the grief was still fresh and raw, something even more shocking unfolded on live television. On the morning of November 24, 1963, millions of Americans turned on their TVs to watch what was supposed to be a routine transfer of a prisoner. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating Kennedy, was being moved from the city jail to the county facility. Reporters, cameramen, and police officers crowded into the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters, anticipating a brief, uneventful walk from one vehicle to another. Then, in an instant, chaos erupted. A man in a dark suit pushed forward from the crowd, raised a pistol, and shot Oswald at point-blank range in the stomach. Oswald gasped, grimaced, and collapsed. Police officers tackled the shooter immediately, but the damage was done. America watched in real time as the man accused of killing the president was himself gunned down on national television. That man was Jack Ruby. The image of Oswald's face contorting in pain as he was shot became etched into the minds of viewers across the country. It was as if the nation had been sucker-punched again, before it could even catch its breath from the first tragedy. People screamed at their televisions. News anchors were stunned, fumbling for words to explain what had just happened. The live nature of the event added an almost surreal quality. For many, it felt like they were watching a movie, except this was painfully real. In the hours that followed, people wanted to know who Jack Ruby was and why he had done it. Details emerged quickly. Ruby was a Dallas nightclub owner, known to many in the area. He wasn't a mysterious outsider or a political extremist. He was a familiar face to local law enforcement and reporters. That made the situation even more perplexing. What would drive someone like that to kill Oswald in front of the entire world? As the country tried to make sense of Ruby's actions, his explanation began to surface. He claimed that his decision to shoot Oswald came from a place of emotion. He had been overwhelmed by grief, particularly at the thought of Jacqueline Kennedy, now a widow, having to endure a long, painful trial involving the man accused of killing her husband. Ruby said he wanted to spare her from that nightmare. It was a statement that added yet another emotional layer to an already overwhelming story. For some, Ruby's explanation made him seem almost like a tragic figure himself, a man so overcome by the national grief that he acted without thinking. For others, it only deepened the mystery. Was there more to the story? Was Ruby acting alone? Or was he part of a larger plot? These questions would linger for decades and spark countless conspiracy theories. But in that moment, the focus remained on the shock of what had just occurred. The double trauma of Kennedy's assassination and Oswald's death in such a short time span left the country emotionally exhausted. Families continued to gather around their television sets, now not just for news, but to seek some kind of comfort, some attempt at understanding. Funerals were watched live. Eulogies were replayed. Television became both a window and a mirror, reflecting a grieving nation and helping it process a tragedy it could barely comprehend. Those few days in November 1963 remain among the most haunting in American history. The moment Jack Ruby pulled the trigger wasn't just about vengeance or emotion. It was a moment that deepened the national wound. In a strange way, it brought people closer together in their shared shock and sorrow. It forced everyone to confront how fragile life is, how quickly the world can change, and how history doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. Jack Ruby was arrested that very moment, but what followed wasn't simple justice. It was a whirlwind of confusion, emotion, and shocking courtroom drama. Let us take you inside the surprising and unsettling trial of the man who shot Oswald, the trial of the decade. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jack Ruby's trial began on March 4, 1964, in Dallas, Texas. The man who had stunned the entire country by gunning down Lee Harvey Oswald in front of television cameras was now at the center of what would become one of the most talked-about legal battles in American history. Ruby's defense team was led by Melvin Belli, a flamboyant and highly regarded San Francisco attorney known for his dramatic courtroom style. Belli didn't deny that Ruby had killed Oswald. The evidence was undeniable. The act had been caught on live television, witnessed by millions. Instead, Belli focused on Ruby's mental state, arguing that he had suffered from a condition known as psychomotor epilepsy. According to Belli, this condition could have caused Ruby to act involuntarily, almost as if he were in a trance, disconnected from reality at the time of the shooting. To support this claim, Belli brought in medical experts who testified about the nature of psychomotor epilepsy. These experts described it as a form of partial seizure that could impair judgment, behavior, and awareness. They suggested that Ruby had exhibited symptoms of the disorder for years, including periods of confusion, memory lapses, and emotional instability. The defense painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by grief, exhausted by days without sleep, and pushed over the edge by the assassination of a president he admired. But the prosecution was not convinced. They countered with their own medical experts, who argued that Ruby was perfectly sane and fully aware of his actions. They described the killing as deliberate and planned, pointing out that Ruby had managed to enter the police station with a loaded weapon and find his way to the basement just in time to confront Oswald. This, they claimed, was not the behavior of a man in a trance-like state, but of someone determined to carry out a specific act of revenge. Witnesses were called to testify about Ruby's behavior before and after the shooting. Some described him as visibly shaken by Kennedy's death, deeply emotional and distraught. Others, however, mentioned his connections with the Dallas police and speculated whether he may have had inside knowledge about Oswald's transfer. Still, the courtroom never veered too far into the territory of conspiracy theories. The focus remained squarely on Ruby's mental state and whether or not it could excuse his actions. Throughout the trial, Ruby himself was often withdrawn and appeared physically unwell. He rarely spoke publicly, though at times he expressed confusion and fear. At one point, he even suggested that his life was in danger and that others were trying to silence him. These outbursts were seized upon by his defense team as further evidence of his fragile mental condition, but they also fueled public speculation and fascination with the case. For many watching from the outside, Ruby had become a mystery, part vigilante, part victim, and part enigma. On March 14, 1964, after 10 days of intense testimony and emotional appeals, the jury returned its verdict. Jack Ruby was found guilty and sentenced to death. The announcement sent another wave of shock through a country already on edge. For some, it felt like justice had been served. For others, it only deepened the mystery. Why had Ruby done it? Had he really acted out of grief, or was there something more? The trial had answered the legal question, but it had left many emotional and psychological questions unresolved. Jack's sentence put him behind bars, but what unfolded next was a life no one ever imagined. Life in prison. Following his conviction, Jack Ruby began serving his sentence at the Dallas County Jail. From the moment he stepped into his cell, it became clear that prison would not be a simple punishment. It would be a crucible of fear, suspicion, and unraveling sanity. Ruby, once a nightclub owner with ties to law enforcement and the press, now found himself on the other side of the bars, living among the very criminals he had once entertained. But what made his imprisonment especially unique was not just his notoriety. It was the bizarre behavior and spiraling mental state that began to take hold almost immediately. Guards and fellow inmates quickly noticed that Ruby was not like other prisoners. At first, some chalked it up to the shock of going from a life of influence to one of confinement. But over time, his actions raised more serious concerns. He began talking about mysterious plots and claimed there were people inside the prison trying to kill him. Ruby insisted that he had been injected with cancer cells and that his food and water were being tampered with. The staff at the jail didn't know what to make of these accusations. Some officers thought he was cracking under pressure. Others wondered if he truly believed what he was saying, or if it was all a tactic to win sympathy and a new trial. Despite the confusion, many officers maintained a professional demeanor, though privately, a few shared their unease. One jailer, who remained anonymous, reportedly said Ruby's fear seemed too real to be faked. He didn't eat for days, said his meals were poisoned. He even covered the toilet with his blanket, like someone was going to come up through the pipes. These weren't the words or behaviors of a man simply pretending. They hinted at a deeper, haunting paranoia that Ruby lived with every hour of every day, behind those cold metal bars. Ruby's claims of being part of a larger conspiracy only added fuel to the public's already burning curiosity about the JFK assassination. He insisted, both in writing and during visits from his lawyers, that powerful forces were pulling strings behind the scenes. Ruby begged for a new trial to be held somewhere far from Dallas, where he believed the entire system had been turned against him. "There's no way I'll get justice here," he was quoted as saying. "They've already decided I'm guilty of more than just Oswald's death." His defense attorney, Melvin Belli, who had previously argued that Ruby was mentally unstable at the time of the shooting, continued to push for a new trial. Belli maintained that Ruby was not in full control of his actions and that the environment in Dallas was too hostile and biased for any fair legal proceeding. Inmates who interacted with Ruby gave mixed accounts. Some said he was quiet and kept to himself, rarely speaking unless prompted. Others described his mood as wildly unpredictable. calm one day, paranoid the next. One fellow prisoner reportedly heard him whisper, "They want me gone before I can talk." A sentence that only deepened the myth surrounding his motives and mental state. Meanwhile, the guards assigned to Ruby often found their role emotionally complicated. Some felt sympathy, recognizing that whether or not he acted alone, Ruby was clearly tormented. Others treated him like a high-profile burden, someone whose presence only brought more media attention and political heat. Still, a few admitted that they sometimes watched him from the observation windows, wondering if they were witnessing a man slowly unravel or someone who truly held dark secrets no one else had uncovered. Ruby's legal team wasn't sitting idle. They were working tirelessly behind the scenes, determined to get him out of that cell. What happened next might just change how you see the entire case. Let's take you through the shocking appeal and the overturned conviction. Appeal and overturned conviction. After nearly 2 years behind bars, Jack Ruby's fate took a dramatic turn in October 1966. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his conviction, citing serious procedural flaws that shook the foundation of the original trial. At the heart of the decision was the issue of location. Ruby's original trial had been held in Dallas, the very city where he shot Lee Harvey Oswald just 2 days after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The court argued that holding such a high-profile case in the emotionally charged city of Dallas had denied Ruby the right to a fair trial. The emotional climate, media frenzy, and widespread outrage created an atmosphere where objectivity seemed impossible. Jurors were likely influenced by the magnitude of the event and the public's reaction, which is why the appeals court ordered a change of venue. Ruby's defense team, led by the charismatic and controversial attorney Melvin Belli, had long claimed that their client had not received a fair trial the first time. Belli argued that Ruby's mental health had been overlooked and that he had been unfairly portrayed as a cold-blooded killer when, in their view, he had acted impulsively and irrationally out of grief and emotional turmoil. They welcomed the new opportunity and began preparing for the retrial, which was set to take place in Wichita Falls, Texas, a smaller, less emotionally charged town where they hoped a new jury might view Ruby's case with fresh eyes and fewer biases. The decision to overturn the conviction stunned many Americans. For some, it felt like justice was slipping away. Ruby had killed a man on live television, an act most considered undeniable and unforgivable. For others, it was a sign that the legal system, despite the intensity of the case, still upheld the principles of fairness and due process. But while his legal team may have felt optimistic about their second chance, Ruby's health was beginning to decline. As the new trial loomed, Ruby's condition worsened. He had already shown signs of mental instability in prison, reporting delusions, expressing fears of being poisoned, and insisting he was part of a vast conspiracy. These claims had often been dismissed as paranoia or as part of his defense strategy, but they painted a picture of a man unraveling under the pressure of his own actions and the spotlight of history. It was becoming increasingly clear that even with a new trial on the horizon, Jack Ruby's story might not end in the courtroom. Wichita Falls, the town chosen for the new trial, began to prepare for the storm that would come with hosting one of the most notorious figures in American legal history. Media outlets speculated on whether Ruby would walk free, receive a lighter sentence, or face the same outcome. But behind the scenes, doctors had begun to worry that Ruby might not make it to the courtroom at all. His health, already fragile, was failing fast. The man who had once stepped out of the shadows of a Dallas police station and into the center of a national tragedy was now wasting away, far from the cameras and headlines that once surrounded him. Ruby's sentence was overturned, offering a glimmer of hope, but he had no idea that this time his own health would become the cruelest enemy he ever faced. A rapid health decline. After the hopeful news that his conviction had been overturned, Jack Ruby might have imagined a chance at freedom, or at least a fair retrial. However, fate had other plans for him. Before the new trial could begin, Ruby's health took a sudden and frightening turn. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, which rapidly spread to his brain and liver. This aggressive disease left him weakened and vulnerable, facing an enemy far more relentless than any legal battle: his own body. On December 9, 1966, Ruby was admitted to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. The hospital was deeply connected to one of the most tragic chapters in American history. It was the very place where President John F. Kennedy had been rushed after he was shot, and where Lee Harvey Oswald, the man Ruby shot, had also died. This eerie coincidence added a surreal and somber dimension to Ruby's final days. The hospital had become a symbol of grief and loss, and now Ruby himself was to join that legacy. Those who saw Ruby during his final days describe a man who was a shadow of his former self. The once fiery and confident individual who had taken control of a dramatic moment in history was now physically and mentally drained. The cancer had taken an aggressive toll on his body, causing severe pain and clouding his mind. Ruby, who had controlled much of the public narrative around his life through media coverage and courtroom battles, was now powerless against his failing health. People close to Ruby recalled a man wrestling with his mortality. Some said he felt abandoned, not only by the justice system, but by his own body. Despite the severity of his illness, Ruby's fighting spirit still lingered. He remained defiant at times, questioning doctors, demanding answers, and struggling to maintain control. Yet, there was also a quiet acceptance, a somber recognition that his time was running out. Staff at Parkland Hospital who cared for Ruby remembered him as a man humbled by his illness. A nurse who worked there years later said, "He was once in control of a very public and violent moment, but lying in that hospital bed, he looked small and scared. Cancer is a great equalizer. It doesn't care about your past or your fame." The irony was harsh. Ruby, the man who had made history with one of the most shocking acts of violence in American history, was now quietly succumbing in the same hospital where those tragic events unfolded. Ruby's decline brought renewed media attention, but the tone was different from before. Instead of the intense judgment and accusations he had faced during his trial, the coverage became more reflective and somber. The headlines shifted from speculation about conspiracies to the grim reality of his deteriorating health. The nation watched as a man once at the center of one of history's most shocking moments faded away. During his hospital stay, Ruby was visited by his lawyers and a few close acquaintances. These visits revealed a man deeply concerned about how history would remember him. He worried that the truth about his motives would be overshadowed by rumors and conspiracy theories. He wanted people to know that he was not part of any grand conspiracy, one lawyer recalled. In his mind, it was a personal, emotional act, driven by grief and sorrow. Despite these attempts to clear his name, cancer relentlessly ravaged Ruby's body. The tumor in his brain caused confusion and disorientation, further diminishing his mental clarity. The powerful and decisive man who had shocked the nation was now fragile and vulnerable. His physical and mental decline was a stark reminder of life's fragility and the limits of human strength. On January 3, 1967, Jack Ruby died from a pulmonary embolism secondary to bronchiolar carcinoma of the lungs. He was only 55 years old. His death came just weeks before his new trial was set to begin, closing the chapter on a life marked by controversy and tragedy. Ruby's final struggle was a quiet, painful battle, far removed from the public eye, unlike the dramatic events that had thrust him into the national spotlight. Ruby was buried beside his parents in West Lawn Cemetery in Norridge, Illinois. The gravesite marks the resting place of a man who had lived a turbulent life, forever tied to one of the darkest moments in American history. While his actions changed the course of events and left a lasting impact on the nation, his death reminds us that beneath every public figure lies a deeply human story of pain, regret, and finality. The rapid decline in Ruby's health and his ultimate death also serves as a somber reflection on the costs of fame and infamy. The man who once commanded attention with a single shot became a tragic figure consumed by illness and isolation. Ruby's story warns us that no matter how powerful or notorious a person may be, they are not immune to the frailty of the human condition. In the years following his death, many have continued to speculate about Ruby's motives and the possibility of conspiracies. But the reality of his final days, spent battling a terminal illness in the hospital where so much sorrow had unfolded, adds a profound and human dimension to a figure often seen only through the lens of history and controversy. Jack Ruby's death was not just the end of a man, but the closing of a dark and complex chapter in American history. His life and death remind us that behind every headline, there is a human being facing struggles and pain, often hidden from public view. His story encourages us to look beyond the surface and remember the humanity in even the most controversial figures. Let's now tell you about the mysterious conspiracy theories that continued to swirl around Jack Ruby long after his death, and how they shaped the legacy he left behind. Conspiracy theories and legacy. The fact that Oswald was shot before he could stand trial meant that many believed the truth about President John F. Kennedy's assassination might never fully come out. Ruby's act eliminated the chance for a public trial that could have shed light on the events leading up to that fateful day in Dallas. This created fertile ground for conspiracy theories, many of which claimed that Ruby was not just a lone man driven by grief, but rather a key player in a much larger and darker plot. From the moment Ruby fired his gun, suspicion and speculation surrounded him. People wondered whether he was working on behalf of others who wanted to silence Oswald forever. The idea that Ruby could have been part of a conspiracy appealed to those who found it hard to believe that such a momentous event was simply the work of one assassin and a spontaneous act of revenge. Theories ranged from Ruby having connections with organized crime to being influenced or even ordered by government entities to prevent Oswald from revealing any secrets during a trial. Despite all these suspicions, the official investigation by the Warren Commission, which was tasked with uncovering the facts about JFK's assassination, concluded that Ruby acted alone. According to the commission, Ruby's shooting of Oswald was an impulsive act driven by emotional pain and grief for the slain president. They found no credible evidence linking Ruby to any conspiracy, organized crime, or government plot. The commission portrayed Ruby as a troubled nightclub owner overwhelmed by the shock and sadness of the moment. Yet, many found this explanation hard to accept. Ruby's background as a nightclub owner with ties to the criminal underworld raised eyebrows and added to the doubts. Interviews and accounts from people who knew him painted a picture of a man who was not always stable, someone capable of unpredictable behavior. Some believed that his connections to certain circles made it plausible He was influenced or used by others with their own agendas. Ruby's death in January only intensified these conspiracy theories. He passed away before his new trial could take place, leaving many questions unanswered and fueling further speculation. The fact that he died of a pulmonary embolism secondary to lung cancer just weeks before the trial led some to suspect foul play. Friends and acquaintances reportedly said Ruby feared he was being poisoned while in custody. His sudden death denied the public a chance to hear his side of the story in court again. And for conspiracy theorists, this was a glaring gap that needed filling. Over the decades, countless books, documentaries, and investigations have revisited Ruby's role in the Kennedy assassination saga. Each new claim or piece of evidence seemed to open fresh avenues for debate and suspicion. Some researchers argued that Ruby's actions fit into a broader pattern of cover-ups designed to hide the true story behind JFK's assassination. Others have questioned the thoroughness and impartiality of the Warren Commission itself, suggesting that political motivations might have influenced the official narrative. Despite the swirling controversies, Ruby's legacy is complicated and layered. On one hand, he is remembered as the man who killed the assassin of a beloved president, a figure forever linked to one of the most tragic moments in American history. On the other hand, he remains a symbol of mystery, doubt, and the painful unknown. His name is often mentioned in discussions about justice, truth, and the shadowy lines between fact and conspiracy. What is clear is that Ruby's actions had a profound impact on the national psyche. His shooting of Oswald was not just a violent act. It was a moment that changed how many Americans viewed the government, the justice system, and the possibility of truth in major historical events. Ruby became a living symbol of the unresolved grief, confusion, and suspicion that followed JFK's assassination. Interviews with those who knew Ruby paint him as a complex man. Some remember him as loyal and protective, someone who genuinely wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of a trial. Others saw him as volatile and troubled, with a dark side linked to his life in the nightclub scene. This duality only adds to the enigmatic nature of his story, making it hard to pin down exactly who he was and what truly motivated him. Even today, Ruby's story continues to provoke strong emotions and curiosity. His killing of Oswald remains one of the most shocking moments in American history, and the questions that followed have never fully been answered. The legacy of Jack Ruby is one of tragedy, mystery, and enduring debate, a reminder of how a single act can ripple through history and leave a lasting mark on the world. What are your thoughts on the fate of Jack Ruby? Share your views in the comments below, and don't forget to click the cards on your screen for more fascinating stories.